Aaron Sandiford, and I'm a political reporter at the Nebraska Examiner. And this is our podcast on Nebraska's 2024 Senate races, Picking Corn. We're coming to you today from the College of Journalism studios at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where your mid-career host is pursuing a master's degree. Our guest today is longtime North Omaha neighborhood activist and advocate and Nebraska civil rights activist Preston Love Jr. He is running this year as a Democrat for the seat held by U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts. Thank you for joining us today, Preston.
Oh, thank you for having me. Aaron, I have a lot of respect for your work, and I'll call in when they decide to give you or not give you your master.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, let's start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself. How would you describe your background, your education, your career, and your time right here on this campus?
Oh, my time right here on this campus, we'll start with that. It was a glorious time. I played football for the University of Nebraska for the Huskers when we won games. And I played, of course, for Bob Devaney, and Tom Osborne was on the coaching staff. Mm-hmm. And we played in the Orange and Cotton Bowls, and I had a glorious time. I was drafted by the Detroit Lions, mm-hmm. and while with the Detroit Lions, I did what I'm doing now.
Oh, yeah.
I sat on the bench. Oh, yeah. Didn't really make it, but my time on campus was fun because I also ran track. I was a graduate from UNL in economics, mm-hmm. and I was a little unique among the players. A lot of them weren't taken serious. That's not degrading, mm-hmm. but it wasn't many in the business world. And I took economics and accounting and those things and enjoyed every minute of it. But I left shortly after I graduated. I worked for 15 years for IBM.
Yes, and I mean, a lot of people don't know how big IBM was in that day.
And quite frankly, Aaron, not only were they were probably the second. Mobile, I think, was the largest mm-hmm. corporate company, but I don't want to say their record, but their experience with African Americans in what you would call the prime or premium jobs mm-hmm. was none. Mm. And I was really part of the pioneering of African Americans in the marketing division, and it was with them on a fast track. It was a result, and if I ever get into discussion with people about affirmative action, I was hired mm-hmm. because of affirmative action, but I excelled, mm-hmm. and I reject the idea of affirmative action. You get hired because that's the only reason why they hired, because they looked at a lot of people before I got hired.
They don't keep a lot of people for 15 years at IBM unless you can do the job.
Right. That's affirmative action squared or something.
Right.
But I surely enjoyed that. But I left there, Aaron. I think to summarize in my own summary mm-hmm. of myself, without even realizing it at the time, even here at the University of Nebraska, there were only 8 African Americans playing for the Huskers mm-hmm. when I was there.
A very different time.
And we were pioneers. Mm-hmm. We were the first to play in the Orange Bowl, mm. believe it or not. And
in a neighborhood that is predominantly African American.
Yes, yeah. And so pioneering is a way to describe most of my life, because I did that pioneering with IBM. After that, I left IBM and opened my first retail computer store in Atlanta. Okay. I sold the very first Apple in the state of Georgia out of my store. It was in 1980.
Oh, my goodness.
When I ordered my inventory, believe it or not, I called Steve and those guys.
Steve Jobs.
Yes. And they said, well, let me look in the garage and see what we could do. So that was a pioneering experience. And then my life and my work changed. And I changed because pretty much I was focused on Preston Love and getting ahead and bling and all that stuff. But I was in Atlanta mm-hmm. and began to immerse with the civil rights community. Mm-hmm. I knew and got to know up close pioneers in that area, all of the families that I could call the King family, the Andrew Young family, Maynard, just the whole 9 yards, John Lewis, the whole 9 yards. I became one of them, not in statue, but I became part of that family.
And that's one of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit. A lot of our folks who are joining this podcast or will be catching up to it might not know your history in politics. And in particular, there's one role that a lot of folks maybe now just kind of take for granted because of President Obama. But you served in a historic role on a historic national campaign for president involving the Reverend Jesse Jackson in 1984.
1984, pioneering. And it was a different time, but his candidacy, historically now, we can reflect on. We knew we were making history, but we didn't know the context of the history. Only one African-American in modern times had run for president prior to him. That was Shirley Chisholm in 1972. She made very small impact, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but Jesse's was a serious campaign.
And it was treated seriously.
And it was treated seriously, but we changed a lot of the rules that we're practicing now. The delegate process was winner take all, and that was unfair, and we got it. His candidacy made the change. But yes, I was Jesse Jackson's guy who designed and ran his campaign. And I say that so proudly, but let me tell you this. Secretly, I know there's nobody listening to your podcast, but I didn't know what I was doing, so to speak.
None of us do.
There was no African-American who had ever run a presidential campaign that I could call up and say, what about this?
Right.
What about that? I will say that it was a mind-blowing experience. And if I could add to your interview, several months ago, I went to Chicago to celebrate Jesse Jackson's 81st birthday. And it was emotional, my friend Aaron, because in 1984, if I may say so, we were two hot cats. He was handsome and I was trying to be handsome.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And we traveled the country. He was the biggest thing in the country politically because he just generated so much stuff, and media, even though he didn't get the nomination. But in the Black community, we were rock stars and all of that. And then we traveled and we're about the same height. And we were all of that. And then I went to his birthday party. He's in wheelchair, can barely speak.
It's hard when we realize we aren't young anymore.
Yes, and the reality set in with me. But that's that. So, when I left and returned to my family after that, I pretty much had changed my whole makeup. And so I like to say it. It's kind of easy to say, but I've spent the next 40 years that brings us to kind of now serving and being more social justice oriented than business oriented.
Right.
And I came back to Nebraska, my home state, in 2005.
And I was going to ask you this. You touched on it a little bit. You've spent a lot of your career walking around some of the modern pillars of that history.
Yeah.
What is the biggest gap in what Nebraskans need to know about those stories that they do not?
Well, I think, and I'm going to get a sidebar on this. I hope bring me back.
Yeah,
bring me back.
You're fine.
Is I do two kinds of tour now, presently. One is I take about 80 people, 40 of which are high school kids, throughout the South to teach them that history, that I am really somewhat of an expert, face-to-face for a solid week.
To experience it.
To experience and see it face-to-face. You can hear and read about Martin Luther King being assassinated, but I take them to the last room he lived in before. So all of that.
I did the tour of Tulsa and Black Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
It changed me.
And we go to Black Wall Street as part of my tour. We go. I could take too much time telling you all the places we do. That's national, but I take Nebraska kids, all races, sex, the whole 9 yards. We do that. Now adults are knocking on the door. I take 2 buses now. The second bus is filled with adults who are trying to learn. But I also do tours of North Omaha, the culture and history. So I'm really answering your question by saying that I have learned by teaching it and making the information available how people who have no idea about it receive it. It can be somewhat emotional, but it always is that it widens people's horizon and they're willing to do something if we have the time.
Sure.
I will tell you about some similar experiences that I've had in greater Nebraska.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that a little bit.
Okay.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the echoes. You and I talked about this a little bit at your announcement for your campaign. Talk about some of the echoes of that history that you hear in our politics today.
Well, I hear the echoes might not be the right word, but I hear vibrations.
Yes.
Because that history should not be that big a deal. It should be that big a deal in content, but not that big a deal as a controversial subject.
Sure.
That's
it's part of our history.
It's nonsensical, really.
Right.
But it's a political ploy to try to submerge the history. And so we as a country, as we now have evolved into a set of things that trouble me and part of the reason why I'm running for office, but we can develop it differently, but is we're so divided along so many lines and so many silos, but there is strategic reasons why people are pushing back, not intellectual reasons. They're pushing back almost as a strategic reason to, in effect, affect negatively one part of our greater community, and that's unfortunate. And it is having other implications, and it has a lot to do with why I'm running for office now at this point, because I watched this for long, but we've gotten to a place now. You know, these things evolve so slowly, you don't realize that you're drowning till the water gets to your nose. But we had a fast fire hose on some of this now, and so I think all of your people listening should realize that what I've come to and what I'm observing, I'm hoping people will come to and observe and make changes in things that they do. Surely I'd like for them to vote for me, but it's just not that simple. The country's got to take control of itself.
Yes.
Evil will always win over good, because good tends to be more relaxed and good tends to be not aggressive. And so you can get, for a while, good thinking and making sense will get rolled over for a while until people finally say, wait a minute, enough is enough. And so a lot of things people are getting away with intellectually in practice, all the way from presidents to city councilmen, in a philosophical and strategic way that works against the country, not against an issue. And I do have a thought on that. But so
go right ahead.
Well, my whole thing that I'm saying on the campaign trail for people to hear me, I hope, take me serious, I could say it another way, is that they may rush to ask me my opinion on this issue or that issue. And my first answer is, we probably can't solve it. Let's talk about why we can't solve it. And that is what we've got now is we have politicians and others who are taking sides, one side or another. And so their focus is their side winning and not the solution. And so you'll never solve it. If your objective and my objective, we have different views, I need my side to win more than I do to solve the problem of immigration.
That was one of the examples I was going to ask. I mean, now what you see in the Senate and the House where they're disagreeing over a negotiated settlement that they negotiated over months.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
I make of it that the people are wanting their side to win just because they want their side to win. And the other side of it is they want the other side to lose. And those are two kind of different rails to get there. And that will lead to no solutions, as it is not leading, even when we have a solution in hand, because, oh man, if we do that, my side is going to lose. How do we ever get to solve some of the big problems? And look at what we're doing globally. We're taking political sides in this country that's affecting the horribleness of two major things going on, the Middle East and in Ukraine.
I was going to ask you about that. What do you think of both of those involvements at the national level, both the military aid for Israel and the military aid for Ukraine?
Well, on Ukraine, I would say that I don't think we as a country and democracy have a choice. We should support Ukraine because there's more at stake than people will even acknowledge. What's at stake is the free world, winning or losing against Russia and others who want to destroy the real world. We can't make it any more difficult than that is. Mm-hmm. So what do? If we can, we support it. Mm-hmm. And so let's don't over-intellectualize this and make it on my side doesn't feel that way. Mm-hmm. And with Israel, I think it's getting complex for you to have a view that you can say good, say it right. Because I uniquely, at least in my community, stood up after October 7th mm-hmm. and supported Israel against Hamas right away because of the atrocities. Mm-hmm. But I've changed. I'm now focused more on the humane side of this war. And so on today, I'm mad at the Hamas or some of the other Palestinian terrorists, mm-hmm. and tomorrow I'm mad at Netanyahu for doing what he's done. So it is a complex thing mm-hmm. for a person, but as a politician, it's crazy mm-hmm. because someone is going to grab hold of when you're on the other side. But the honest opinion that I have mm-hmm. is that as a senator, let's mm-hmm. say, but our country, we ought to put a big part of our focus on humanity mm-hmm. and all of that. And the same thing at the border. You've been around politics a long time. I've heard you try to encourage candidates to run. Yeah.
I was at some forums that you used to run. Yeah. Well, you've been in politics for years. Why did you pick this race against this opponent with his deep pockets and his high name ID after 2 terms as governor?
Well, Aaron, I really would like to separate the question. Is a good question in the kind of 2 parts. Why did I pick the race? And then why would I choose to run against Goliath? Mm-hmm. And I didn't really choose the race.
Okay.
I chose the time to run. That may sound a little cute, but I think I have a strong feeling mm-hmm. about Nebraska, mm-hmm. the country, and they brought me to a conclusion that somebody needs to run now, and it turned out to be me. If there were others, I would not run and support them.
Right.
But what this issue is some of the things we touched on. I'm looking at my country, and we're divided and divisive mm-hmm. on so many things. I could call a roll, but I'll name a few. We're divided about party, mm-hmm. okay? I mean, we've always had party, but we're now divisive party. We're divided along gender mm-hmm. and gender-related issues, and that there is a tie to the parties a little bit there. We're divided along religious areas. We're divided in Nebraska that is a short list, by mm-hmm. the way, but you get the point. But in Nebraska, we have those same divisions, mm-hmm. but we have additional. And I didn't mention race in my national, but I would add race mm-hmm. to that. And not only race, but now ethnicity. And all the things that go with the divisions, and some of it is hate on one side or the other. And so, but in Nebraska, it is definitely geographic. Our urban versus rural mm-hmm. divisions are great. And I want to talk about that if we have time.
Absolutely.
A little bit. Then all the other divisions mm-hmm. that are present nationally, we have them here. But the geographic division or so-called division mm-hmm. is there. And so, but it's not division in a clean sense. Mm. It's a divisions in a dirty way, in that it's divisive and it's getting in the way. As I mentioned, people are on sides. And so somebody, and I haven't said it through the interview. You can take this and put it in all the other segments.
Sure.
I do really feel that the healthy country is the country with 2 political parties. But we now have Democrats and Republicans. Then we have Trump. Mm. And I've just put Trump in another category. And Trump's category is a threat to democracy. The biggest of the division is those who believe and practice it and those who are working against it, knowingly or otherwise, just forgetting about the truth of things. And so I got to say that, but Trump has become a wedge in our country. And so we no longer have the luxury of just having divisions. We have divisive divisions. And so when do we take a stand, each of us? And so it's now. It's now.
Yeah.
And we do. And so the answer to your question A, part A, is that I'm taking a stand. Okay. I'm trying to do the best I can with my longevity, my wisdom, and the experiences that come with it. But quickly, on the second part of your question, it didn't matter who I was running against, given that scenario. And what you might do is you might say, well, I want to do that, but not against Goliath. And so that's a mistake. That's a mistake. Just like it was when little David picked up his hand. I know you like that. But so we've got to challenge it where it is. And the race takes on a bigger dynamic than who gets the most votes in a funny kind of way. It is challenging these things. I want to say about Nebraska, Aaron, I'm not giving you a chance to follow up on that, but the key thing that I want to say, and part of my reasoning for running, in Nebraska, we've got a scenario that makes it all worse. Okay. And that is, we have one party that rules. We have one party that is the governor. That same party, all three of our congressmen, that same party, both of our senators, and in some of the cities, our mayor. And so that doesn't work well for all of Nebraska. It works well for a few. And in my particular race, what you add to that is you got some privilege going on. And so the people are being overwhelmed by this. And in the case of privilege, people are putting privilege over people.
What would you say are the key issues that drove you to run, and how would you help the Senate address them?
The key issues I've stated without you realizing is that somebody, and I'm not saying I'm the only one, but somebody has to be really dedicated and really committed to try to bridge gaps. And not only are those gaps to be done on the Senate floor, but to be communicating it back to Nebraska and trying to help bridge the gaps in our own state. And so I have a lot of issues that I feel important about, and I'll kind of list them real quick.
Sure.
But I'm surely very much for a woman's right to choose and women's rights in that sort of way. So it really kind of is umbrella to abortion-related issues. I'd love to just, when I get there, flip a switch and go back to before
Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. And so, and I'm very much, and this catch Nebraskans by surprise, I'm not against guns, but I'm against assault weapons and things that we can do to avoid some things like red flags. So that's another one. We're doing an interview relative to climate change and toxics in the air. I feel strongly, and if you have interaction with the younger generation, as I do as a college professor, believe me, that is high on their list, because what we're doing is messing up for
they have to live with our decisions.
And they realize that. And so that's another issue. I surely am one who would fight for equal rights for LGBT and all of many other things. I want to say that even me, Preston Love, urban Preston Love, feels I have kind of researched and got to know people in greater Nebraska. And so one of the big things is the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill, which is a kind of a 5-year increments, was not voted in for 5 more years. They kind of did what they're doing a lot, kick that can for a year. So I'm going to be an advocate for the Farm Bill. And guess what? This is where it becomes so interesting. Why am I doing that? Well, first of all, if I'm going to be a senator, I'm proposing that the senators and the congressmen, but more the two senators, be a senator for all of Nebraska, not just for their little friends or their area.
Yeah, and you've talked about this before. You try to arrange trips for folks who are from North Omaha, South Omaha to Western Nebraska and vice versa.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what that exchange program is.
The only thing I would push back on the way he said, I'm doing it. I'm not trying to.
Gotcha.
But let me give you a good example of me talking straight, because what I'm getting ready to tell you happened way before I'm running for this office, or I was thinking about running. It was just the right thing to do. I wrote an editorial for the Omaha World Herald called Let's Plant the Seed. And what it was is an article about that rural and urban Nebraska they have more in common. We have more in common than we have, but we should try to get to know each other. We probably can get together and help solve the problems that would help us both.
Right.
And that got picked up by lots of people in greater Nebraska, including Jeff Yost, who is the executive director of Nebraska Community Foundation. And he wrote back, and we developed a friendship. And out of that friendship of he and I, from that article, April of 2020, we've actually did something. And what we did is we got people from both of our sides of the state to meet each other, know each other, stay overnight in each other. I've taken a couple of delegations to Ocala and McCook and Imperial, Nebraska, stayed all night, learned history there, learned culture there. But they have come to North Omaha and did things, and that was new to me. They came they came to the Juneteenth parade, but over time.
And they saw people as people.
They saw people as people, and then they made personal friends, and then all of a sudden we can change now conversations about issues and solutions. You shouldn't have, and we didn't try to, okay, now that we're together, what can we do? No, it's a lesson. We got to know each other. We got to realize that I can kind of trust you. And guess what else? We can disagree and move on. We don't have to be disagreeable. And I've seen that work. And so I'm proposing that we need to break the cycle. I'm hoping that just my election, if I would be successful, would break the cycle of one party ruling all of the federal representatives. And so is it okay for one person other than that same party? I'm avoiding Democrat versus Republican because it's not that simple. But because
there are states where it's all Democrats.
Yeah, because it could be the same problem other places. So is it okay to have a Democrat among all the rest of and it would not only be okay, but all of us would be better if we were not fighting about everything, but we said, well, I hadn't thought about that perspective, and on and on and on.
You were talking a little bit the last time that you and I talked about how you might be able to boost turnout in some communities that maybe hadn't turned out very regularly. You mentioned your own community in North Omaha a little bit. How will your candidacy help do that and help maybe potentially Democrats in other races?
My candidacy will help because my community is going to vote much stronger than they have in decades because one of their own is running, and one of their own is not quite enough. But I've been serving my community for 20 years. I have the respect and credibility within the community. They would be happy to see me win, so they're going to come out and vote. Now, that's what that is. But guess what? If they do come out and vote in record numbers, then every other Democrat in my county and also partly in the state will benefit. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
In the Congressional District 2, where we have had a series of 2-year congressional races, and
that have been very competitive.
And the margin of victory is about the same margin of not voting in North Omaha. So if we vote in North Omaha, we very well could do several things. One, we could elect whoever is running, in this case, Tony Vargas. It could make the difference. It's just that simple. So whoever heard of running for Senate so you can get a House member, but that could happen. We'll also solidify maybe, again, the split electoral vote. And by the way, in 2024, as close as this race promises to be, that split electoral vote could be critical. And so that
in the presidential race.
And not only that, who's talking about some of the things I'm talking about? So the victory are all over the place. The victory is people are hearing and all of that hopefully will just kind of begin to turn the screw towards breaking the cycle of just one year after another doing the same thing, I think. And then also, I don't know, I'm in Lincoln today, and I have to assess it. But whoever's running, Carol Blood, I believe, is running for this
in the first
district, that some of those same votes that have been staying home might just be captivated by and it's all would work in that. So it's a little more profound than just old Preston running against little David running against Goliath.
Understood. And talk a little bit, if you can, about you've been working for years to try to motivate that vote.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what needs to change to encourage people who have either ignored voting or have largely given up voting to give it another chance.
They need to have hope. And I'm talking from the grassroots, as we call people, but all the way middle class. They've lost the hope, not necessarily in their lives, but they lost the hope of the real impact of voting individually, but that what a block of votes can mean for leverage to get things done. The relationship seems to have been lost. People no longer vote because very few, the seniors do, vote because in the day, we couldn't vote, and older citizens remember that, and they'll go vote because we fought for the right. But that doesn't help us with young folks and a lot of not so young folks. It's too distant. And so they've got to see some relationship that, for example, and I'm not talking party politics heavy today or any other day, but there's some things that happen in this administration, which happen to be Democratic, that have affected my community. We just got $250 or so million for economic development from a policy statement that came through our state that would never have happened. And so it did happen. Don't you realize the relationship for that vote, how the dotted line connects? And there's so many other dotted lines. Partly what I can do is say that to people. I think we're also making history, Aaron, in that never before has a United States Senator's candidate have his headquarters on 24th Street.
Understood.
Yeah.
And you've been open about this. I read a great profile of you one time. You've been open about your own journey to healing from struggling with addiction.
Yeah.
How does that experience inform your approach to how the federal government should help communities combat substance use and abuse?
Yeah, it does. It's really hard for some people to understand when I say this, but I'm a better man having gone through my struggles. I am a better man. I'm not suggesting that's the scenario for everybody.
Right.
But because of my struggles, which I've conquered and healed myself and found God and all of that, and then served for 20 years afterwards because it gave me more empathy. But I understand things that a lot of people go through their whole life never really having a good. So when a policy decision comes up for homeless or people with addiction, if you don't really have an insight into it, you're gonna not do it. I have an insight. I have something to offer that nobody else, lots of people can. And so it's made me better. I wouldn't recommend it,
no,
but it's made me better.
Right.
Yes.
And just kind of to wind things up, I know you have to go. You've actually, right now there's a lot of talk in our political circles about how we come back together as a country. You've talked about bridging divides. What is the path forward for people to figure out with one another and how far apart we are? You've talked about rural and urban. You've talked about Democrats and Republicans. What is the path forward to a country that remembers they are Americans?
Yeah. Well, I think in today's world, that path has to begin with leadership. We've got to have leaders who feel that way and are speaking and acting that way, and that'll begin to bridge gaps without a particular issue. It's just the mindset. And I think Trump has created where it looks like by being divisive and that way have been rewarded because they get his favor, and his favor doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win an election, but they keep thinking they do. But he's so powerful in his way. So that's why many of us hope that he'll go away, if you want to put it that way. Not because he's a Republican, but he's just he has created an environment that when he goes away, in whatever way he goes away, steps away, or whatever, or loses an election, and then, then I think it will be okay to begin to talk and work together. Just like people are saying that this problem is bigger than our divisions on the border, and they can't get by the divisionary overlay, and the same thing with our budget and all that stuff. So I think sometimes if we have the confidence, but it's too early to say, these things will fix themselves, but the leadership has to lead it. Eventually, the people will lead solutions to problems, but it's going to be harder that way.
Yeah.
In the civil rights era, the people fought the battles, but the leaders had to finally pass the laws. And so yes.
Okay. And one last thing, and then we'll wrap it up. Who is Preston Love away from all this? What do you do? What do you read? What do you enjoy when you're not a Senate candidate?
Well, I'm a different person than I was 20 years ago. What I enjoy now, I'm a Sunday school teacher, and I am having so much, I don't want to say fun, but it is fun.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much about my spiritual self and God. So I enjoy that. My wife is a woman of God, so we are compatible that way. I am a big sports fan, and I tell you, reading is not as much fun as it used to be because I'm reading positions that I don't have the time like I used to read a novel. I do an extremely large amount of writing, and so I enjoy that. Those are things that give me real pause.
Well, thank you for joining us today, sir. I appreciate it very much that you took the time with us. And that will wrap up our latest conversation on Picking Corn.